Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Alright, everybody, welcome back to Policy and Rights here in Depictions Media Radio. I'm your host, Michael Clogs. We're going to hear some comments about the Alberta election. Danielle Smith came out to be the victor. The interesting part about this is, as much as we broadcast, please go vote, get your voice heard. And it's one of the best ways if we want to see change in our world is to go vote. The election had one of the lowest turnouts for Alberta in Alberta history. That the voter turnout was extremely low, and Danielle Smith did come out to be the victor over, of course, Notley with the NDP, and she gets to continue her what it is she was working on for her vision of what Alberta should look like. And congratulations to her on that, coming up with the victory. But we do need to stress that, yes, we do actually need to go vote. We can't be disheartened by we hear things about foreign interference into the electoral system. We can't be disheartened by that, and we're actually going to hear Jagmeet Singh make some comments about that, and that he is continuing to call for a public inquiry into the public interference in what China has done and what the CSIS records and information actually has inside of it, so that they can figure out how to improve the system and make the system better. There were some comments and questions about would it trigger a confidence vote, in which case everybody goes into election mode. And Jagmeet Singh was adamant that that's not the ultimate goal of what he wants. What he wants is to see the truth come out about what is happening inside of the electoral process. So, and we're also going to hear, of course, Alberta is still in a wildfire emergency, which, well, Danielle Smith gets to keep going with that, which is a continued uphill battle. And now Nova Scotia is seeing the same thing with forest fires happening. We're going to also hear comments about the opioid crisis, as Elizabeth May is joined by others speaking for safe supply, and to treat addiction as a mental illness and not to treat it just on a criminal basis, to maybe decriminalize drugs so that people can get the help they need with mental illness and addiction. Along with that, we're also going to hear some other comments about other issues that happen across Canada, as we listen to all of the segments today. So why don't we start off with Justin Trudeau, as he is going to make the first segment.
Une grande étoile québécoise s'est éteinte aujourd'hui. Michel Côté faisait partie du quotidien de millions de maisons québécoises pendant des décennies. Il nous a fait rire, il nous a fait pleurer. Je me souviens d'avoir été tellement touché et inspiré par son rôle dans Crazy, un des premiers films avec lui que j'avais vu, que ça me reste toujours à ce jour comme étant quelque chose qui m'a vraiment bougé, qui a fait réagir. D'être un père comme ça, en tout cas, c'était un grand artiste et l'univers culturel et médiatique et artistique québécoise va pleurer sa perte pendant longtemps. Michel Côté was an extraordinary actor who moved us all as Quebecers in so many different ways, and is one that those who don't know who he is would be good to view some of his films. I think his abilities as an actor and comedian were legendary. Merci tout le monde.
Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Singh wants the Special Rapporteur to step down.
Bonjour. Ben, c'était un artiste incroyable, un humoriste incroyable, mais il nous a tous touchés, entre autres, moi personnellement dans le film Crazy, je l'avais trouvé exceptionnel. J'ai eu la chance de le voir dans Brou aussi, donc c'est une grande perte pour le Québec, puis mes pensées sont évidemment avec la famille immédiate, les amis, tout ça, là, mais c'est une grande perte pour le monde artistique au Québec. Merci.
About the Alberta election, just your general thoughts?
My thoughts are that Albertans are going to make their choice today. We'll see who the premier is tonight, and I encourage everybody to go out and vote. Donc, j'encourage tous les Albertains d'aller aux urnes aujourd'hui, et plus tard aujourd'hui, on va savoir c'est qui le premier ministre de l'Alberta.
I want to ask you about Uganda and this latest anti-LGBT law that they have enacted or seem to have enacted. What's your reaction?
Well, we have to stay vigilant in our own country, but we also have to raise our voices internationally when we see our rights taken away from people and rights that were hard-fought being scaled back. Look, we don't have to go very far in our own country to look at people that are trying to make sure that pride flags aren't flown. You don't have to go further than Oxford County to see that. Chilliwack, BC has had issues with trans kids in school, and now we see even in Atlantic provinces the rights of kids to be who they are in school trying to be taken away. So we have to remain vigilant on LGBTQIS plus rights here in Canada, and we have to stick up for them around the world as well.
Back to Alberta, just
Sure.
How do you envision the federal government working with whoever is elected next when it comes to, some of the challenges related to climate change or capping emissions?
Sure, as Minister of Alberta, my job has been since day one to find common ground and to work on files together. And whether it's been Premier Notley's group in my first mandate or whether it was Premier Kenny's group in the second mandate, the job is to represent all Albertans. And I can tell you when I'm on the doors talking with people, what they tell us is we elect municipal, provincial, and federal reps to get the work done. We expect you all to work together, and that's that will be my approach with whoever the new cabinet and MLAs are after today's election. Thanks, everyone. Merci.
Guys. Thanks. Your initial reaction?
Well, I mean, this isn't new money. It was announced in the budget. And, I go back, the Prime Minister acknowledged what was happening around violence against Indigenous women and girls as a genocide, yet they're not investing adequately in it. And I agree with the chair of the Family and Survivor Circle, the National Family and Survivor Circle, that it needs to be accountable. It needs to be, spent in a timely way, and it needs to be measurable goals. The federal government has a habit of making these big announcements and then not spending the money. So we know about the money in the 2023 budget. We know they need to invest more if they're serious about addressing this ongoing genocide, and they need to get that money out the door, unlike past monies that they've allocated, including from 2020, and we're still waiting for them to spend it.
What about the idea, what do you think the idea of them getting money for, setting aside, putting money, including money for men and boys as well?
Well, I mean, absolutely. We need to look after everybody's health and well-being, and certainly the well-being of men and boys. I absolutely think that's necessary. Indigenous women and girls and diverse gendered folks are not perpetrating violence on ourselves. Often it's happening at the hands of men and boys. So we need to make sure that we look after men and boys as well. We need to make sure that they're healthy. So I do support that.
Good morning. Thank you for coming to this press conference, which is fully nonpartisan and focused on the crisis, the opioid crisis, the importance of harm reduction, and policies that focus on safe supply and decriminalization. I'm joined today, and we're going to have a speaking order as follows. I'm really honored to be joined by a number of the real experts through tragedy in this issue with Moms Stop the Harm. First, we're going to hear from Adam Van Couverden, Parliamentary Secretary to Health. Then I'm going to invite Leslie McBain from Moms Stop the Harm, and Ruth Fox, and Christine Taylor to take the stage. Followed up, the closing words will be from Mike Morris, MP for Kitchener Centre. So I'll just turn the microphone over to Adam.
Thank you, MP May. It's a real pleasure to be here, and Elizabeth, we call each other by our first names because we're friends and colleagues, and the reason that we're here today is because members of the Liberal Party, the Green Party, the NDP, and the Bloc Québécois have become increasingly horrified by the really fact-free rhetoric coming from the Conservative Party as it relates to safe supply and harm reduction in this country. We have to acknowledge that we have an opioid crisis and a poisoned drug crisis in Canada, and the type of rhetoric that's coming from Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives right now is doing more harm. It's spreading mistruth, it's creating more stigma, and it's not doing anything to help people who actually need it. So I'm really glad to be joined today by Leslie, Christine, and Ruth, who I've just met, but who are familiar to everybody who really knows what they're talking about when it comes to the opioid crisis in Canada. I want to acknowledge that I'm a politician. Like Pierre Poilievre and Elizabeth May and Mike Morris, I'm a politician, not an expert in the opioid crisis or really very many other things. That's why we rely on experts. We rely on experts for that academic approach, for an evidence-based solution, and since Canada at large has been employing a safe supply and harm reduction approach and an evidence-based approach to solving for the opioid epidemic, there have been tens of thousands of overdose reversals. Lives are being saved. This is not work that's complete, it's ongoing, but the type of fact-free nonsense that's been coming out of the Conservative side on this lately is harmful, and it needs to stop. So with that, I pass it over to Moms to Stop the Harm, whether that's Ruth, Christine, or Leslie. I'm not sure, but I'd just like to thank you for your time today, for coming here to Ottawa, and for sharing your lived and living experience, which is informing our government's actions on how we support people through the toughest times of their life. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks, Evan. We are reluctant experts. We never wanted to be standing here, and we're standing here because our children have died from drug harms. We are advocates for the implementation right now, other things as well, but the implementation of a safe, regulated, legal supply of drugs for people who need them.
That's my brother's daughter.
We really want to implore the public to understand what that means. It doesn't mean standing on the corner and giving out drugs to kids, which has been sort of intimated by the Conservatives. We want to set the record straight. This project will be very highly regulated, highly documented. the research will be, the research is there, the statistics will be there as well.
You like the way I said that?
We know that the only way to stop or reduce the horrendous number of deaths is to implement a regulated supply. I mean, people who are addicted to tobacco, people who are addicted to alcohol, have a safe, regulated supply. They can use it unsafely, but it's up to them. People who are addicted, and I'm hoping the public understands addiction as we go along, need to have the drug they're addicted or dependent on. And they have to go out into the black market, which is run by the by gangs, by organized crime. So we are making people who are addicted and dependent go out into that market to get the medicine they need. This isn't how we work in Canada. We help people who have health conditions. We actually can easily compare what happens with people who are addicted and how they're treated with people who have heart attacks and how they're treated. They are followed for life. They have the best medicines in the world. They have the best doctors in the world here in Canada, but not so with people who are addicted. So we are working so hard to show that, drug use is a problem, but it shouldn't be deadly. It should be treated, when people come into the ER, they should be treated with respect. They should be treated with ongoing care and support. They shouldn't be just turfed out the door, which happens everywhere across the land. Our kids died because they didn't have what we are advocating for. They didn't have services. They didn't have harm reduction. They weren't able to get into treatment when they needed it. The Conservatives say that they're going to build this fantastic amount of treatment beds and evidence-based and all of those things. And we agree we need those. But dead people can't access those services. So we're here to tell the world, stop the deaths. And we will say that every single day for the rest of our lives, because that's where our grief will be. For the rest of our lives, we're in grief because we lost our kids. Thanks. And I would like to hand it over to Christine Naylor.
Now we're all set. Excellent. Yeah. So why don't we start with this?
So I've prepared something to say because I'm not as good as Leslie and when I'm nervous. So I just want to say I'm here in Ottawa today to stand united with advocates from across our province and country to advocate in support of safe supply and other harm reduction measures that meet people where they are and help to keep them alive. Our country needs to move forward, not backwards, when it comes to measures to address the toxic drug supply. Measures taken to date to address the toxic crisis have failed. The results of these failures are heartbreaking in the extreme. Since 2016, over 35,000 Canadians have lost their lives due to our country's failed drug policies. My son was one of them. 35,000. This is a number that is staggering, and it should outrage Canadians, and yet it doesn't. And why? Because of stigma. Every drug death is a policy failure, and it's a policy choice. Every life loss mattered. Every loss affects a family, and it leaves ripples of grief, trauma, and heartbreak in communities across our country. In November of 2020, our worst nightmare came true. We lost our son Ryan to a toxic drug poisoning. As much as I wanted it not to be real, to wake up and it all to be a bad dream, it wasn't. On Ryan's 35th birthday, instead of celebrating with our son, we buried him. Ryan lived with concurrent disorders, having both bipolar disorder and substance use disorder. The last 8 years of his life were a struggle. It didn't have to be that way, and I truly believe if society supported instead of shamed those living with mental illness and substance use issues, Ryan's story would have had a different ending. Ryan is dead because he was denied a safe supply of what for him was his medicine. It was a drug he found that helped him to cope with his bipolar disorder. Since Ryan's passing, my husband and I formed a nonprofit organization in Ryan's memory and honor. Our mission is to advocate for and support those living with mental illness and substance use issues and experiencing homelessness. Our work brings us into contact with so many people in our community that are struggling with substance use issues. We have needlessly lost so many members of our communities. These deaths were preventable. We lose approximately one member of our community a week. The toxic drug crisis continues to take a toll on our community and on our country. As a co-founder and director of Ryan's Hope and as an advocate for Moms Stop the Harm, I vocally advocate for decriminalization, safe supply, and other health-based measures to support people living with substance use issues. Public health experts, law enforcement, frontline workers, and people with lived and living experience have long called for a shift in Canada's approach to substance use, including decriminalization of simple expungement of convictions, universal access to treatment and recovery programs, but the access has to be voluntary. Forced treatment, we know, does not work. Yet instead of moving forward in a more health and evidence-based approach to address this public health emergency, the Conservatives are calling for measures to reverse the small steps that we have taken and bring us back even further backwards with our country's drug policy. This will have devastating effects and it will cost countless lives. This is why advocates have come to Ottawa to stand united at Parliament. The cost of us not standing up and speaking out is too high. Together we will change policy, end stigma, and save lives. Thank you. And now you can speak first.
You already cut them.
I know, but I had to mix it all together and you didn't cover up your camera.
Huh? Oh.
Good morning. I've jotted down some words as well.
Just letting you know it's all ready to go. Suck!
In August 2020, my world and my heart were forever shattered when my youngest son, Trevor, died from toxic drug poisoning. Trevor died in his home. He did not have a history of problematic substance use. He was 25 years old and had a full and promising life ahead of him. I believe that if it wasn't for the stigma associated with substance use, criminalization of people who use substances, and the toxic supply, Trevor would be with us today. As Trevor's death illustrates, it is not only those who struggle with substance use disorder who are dying. Anyone who uses substances is at risk, and these are preventable deaths. We have a policy and social framework which judges, shames, and punishes people who use drugs. We need decriminalization of persons who use drugs and access to regulated substances, often called safe supply, within the framework of a compassionate public health care approach. An approach that respects human rights, meets people where they are, and does not stigmatize or discriminate on any basis. If there was safe supply, Trevor would be here today. Simply put, nobody has died from safer supply while the toxic drug supply has killed almost 35,000 Canadians since 2016 and continues to take the lives of about 20 people across Canada every day. Every day, 20 families are plunged into never-ending grief. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Really honored to be here with Senator Kim Pate to my right and Victoria Pearson from March of Dimes Canada, to continue to call for the federal government to cut the delays on C-22, to recognize that people with disabilities have been waiting far too long, that people with disabilities continue to live in legislated poverty across the country, that 40% of people living in poverty across the country are living with a disability. And they could be acting right now. We're calling on them to, first of all, prioritize C-22. To bring C-22, this is the Canada Disability Benefit Act that the Senate has now moved ahead with, to bring it back to the floor of the House of Commons. In doing so, to ratify all the amendments from the Senate, the good work that Senator Pate and her colleagues have done to improve the bill, and while they're at it, to budget the benefit. because nothing changes for people with disabilities until the Canada Disability Benefit is funded. There have been 5 sitting days this week, 5 different opportunities the federal government had to reintroduce C-22. It's National Accessibility Week. Is there a better time than that to be reintroducing C-22? Disappointed they haven't yet, but we continue to call on them without delay to move forward on reintroducing and giving C-22, the Canada Disability Benefit Act, the priority it deserves, and to act with the urgency that the disability community continues to call for. I'll now turn to Senator Kim Pate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morris, and as Member of Parliament who has championed this, it's vitally important. The government took a very clear position that they were going to support a disability benefit. They introduced it. That's fantastic. The minister has done incredible work, has the level of support from the community, disability community, that is unprecedented. The challenge is that the bill we got as a Senate was a piece of framework legislation that was virtually empty and devoid of any substance. Now, we think that what we sent back is not the best it could be, but it certainly would mean some things like adequacy, help prevent clawbacks, help ensure that we actually see the benefits roll out more expeditiously, and that the consultations start very quickly with disability groups. It's vitally important that this go ahead. My understanding was this Accessibility Week, it would be considered in the House of Commons. It's a huge disappointment to see it being delayed further by this government. We worked very hard in the Senate to work through as many of the issues as quickly as possible to get it back here, so that there were at least 4 sitting weeks in order for it to be considered. The time is running out, and people with disabilities can't wait. They've been waiting already several years for this benefit since it was first announced. So the time to act is now. I'm hoping that all of the members of Parliament here will take it upon themselves to just support the Senate amendments and get this benefit rolling out as quickly as possible to all people who deserve it and who need to be lifted out of poverty, not after our summer break, not sometime long into the future, but now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. March Times Canada is one of 13 organizations that last week sent a letter to House leaders from all parties about Bill C-22. And our message was simple. We need to return this legislation to the order paper of the House of Commons and pass it without any further delay. And it must receive royal assent before Parliament adjourns for the summer. The time to act is now. Every day that we wait for this bill is a day that people with disabilities in this country must continue to live in poverty. Every day we wait delays the critical next steps of this process. The community, Canada's disability community, is ready. We are ready to roll up our sleeves, to lean in, and to partner in the co-creation of the regulations that will establish the key details of this benefit. We are ready to partner in the implementation and rollout of the benefit so that it can reach as many people with disabilities as possible and lift them out of poverty, restoring independence and dignity. We are ready, but the next steps are up to this House. And so on behalf of people living with disabilities in every corner of this country, we implore you, let's get this done. Thank you.
Victoria, thank you for those strong words. It's always so encouraging to see the disability community, the disability community united, from Disability Without Poverty to March of Dimes to Inclusion Canada, every step of the way, calling for this benefit to be prioritized with the urgency it deserves. Thank you. Questions?
For Victoria, the letters to the House Leader's Office. Have you heard any response back? The House is going to rise in probably about 2 weeks. Any response there?
We haven't had a formal response to our letter. We're encouraged by some of what we're hearing while we're here this week in Ottawa, but we really need to see the evidence of this bill on the notice paper to feel confident that this is going to get done in time for the adjournment.
And I think the best evidence of the answer to that question is whether C-22 is on the order paper. And again, it hasn't been reintroduced. As I said earlier, there were 5 different opportunities this week to see it come up. and we need to continue to call for the governing party to put it up. Thank you. Thank you.
Bonjour, good day. I'll have an opening and then I'll be ready for your questions. I want to just start off by acknowledging that there are so many forest fires across the country, and our first responders, firefighters are fighting hard. Communities are devastated, and I just want to acknowledge the work that's being done and also the challenging times for a lot of Canadians right now. I also want to talk about our Opposition Day motion. In our motion, we are calling for the government to remove Mr. Johnston as a special rapporteur. We know that a lot of Canadians have left countries where they were oppressed. They fled those countries and came to Canada seeking security, seeking safety, seeking freedom. Sadly, that same oppression has followed them to Canada. And there are countless Canadians that have shared their stories about how they are experiencing foreign interference in their lives. People of Iranian descent, Canadians that have come from India, Canadians that have come from countries around the world have continued to face foreign interference in their lives here in Canada, and we are worried about that. We also know that there's clear allegations of foreign interference in our electoral system, and it's something we take seriously. Unlike Mr. Trudeau, who wants to ignore this, sweep it under the rug, or unlike Mr. Poilievre, for whom this is just a game. It's just playing a political game here. New Democrats are taking it seriously. I'm going to be receiving the special briefing, confidential information regarding what CSIS knows, because I think this is serious. And that's why we're calling for Mr. Johnston to step aside. We've been very careful that from the beginning we believe the public inquiry is the right step, but we've never, and I don't attack Mr. Johnston personally, but I am concerned that there is a very clear apprehension of bias that undermines the work that he can do. And so at this point, we are asking for Mr. Johnston to be removed, and that's what our Opposition Day motion is about. In addition, we are reiterating our call for a public inquiry, because that is a process that has enough rigor to restore Canadians' confidence in the electoral system. In addition to letting Canadians know that we take the serious allegations against Canadians in general and against our Parliament seriously, we also know that there is an apathy around voting. Less and less Canadians are turning out to vote. And I think that foreign interference in the electoral system does nothing to assuage that apathy. In fact, it might even contribute to it. So I really believe it is important to take this seriously, and that's why we're putting forward this motion today. Donc, on sait qu'il y a plusieurs Canadiens qui ont fui des pays où ils ont fait face à l'oppression pour arriver au Canada où ils ont eu un espoir qu'ils seront dans un espace de liberté et de sécurité. Mais malheureusement, cette même oppression a suivi ces Canadiens ici au Canada. On a eu des rencontres, on a parlé avec plusieurs Canadiens qui ont partagé leur histoire, comment ils continuent de faire face à l'ingérence étrangère, les Canadiens d'origine de l'Inde, de l'Iran et évidemment de la Chine. Donc, on prend en sérieux ces allégations. Aussi, on prend de sérieux les allégations d'ingérence politique, les ingérences étrangères dans notre système électoral, dans notre système politique. Contrairement à M. Trudeau, qui veut ignorer ces allégations, et contrairement à M. Poilievre, qui veut jouer un jeu politique, nous ont montré une approche sérieuse et prudente. Ça, c'est pourquoi, dans notre motion aujourd'hui, on va exiger le gouvernement d'enlever M. Johnston du processus. C'est clair qu'il y a une apparence de partialité qui nuit à ses efforts de restaurer la confiance dans notre système électoral. Et on va encore demander une enquête publique, exiger le gouvernement de lancer une enquête publique, parce que ça, c'est la seule façon d'avoir un processus avec les rigueur nécessaires pour répondre à cette crise, à cette menace sérieuse. Avec ça, je suis prêt pour vos questions. With that, I'm ready for any questions you might have.
Monsieur Singh, savez-vous quand est-ce que vous allez faire votre... Savez-vous quand est-ce que vous allez avoir votre briefing vous allez avoir votre code de sécurité et pouvoir consulter les documents secrets, l'annexe confidentielle du rapport de M. Johnston. Puis après, j'ai un follow-up.
Oui. Non, on n'a pas reçu la date, mais j'ai aussi écrit une lettre et dans laquelle j'ai dit que je veux avoir les mêmes garanties que M. Johnston, que je peux donner mon opinion. Après, j'ai vu les documents. Après, j'ai vu les documents secrets, que je peux aussi donner mon opinion sur l'enquête publique, mon opinion sur le travail du gouvernement. Donc, j'ai écrit cette lettre, donc on attend la réponse de cette lettre et aussi on attend la date pour ce briefing.
Puis sur le...
Just in English on that. I've not received the date yet. I've also written on when I'll be briefed on that confidential information that CSIS has. I've also written a letter making it very clear that I want to have the same ability as Mr. Johnston to provide my opinion on the evidence that I see, my opinion on a public inquiry, my opinion on the government's actions. And we're waiting for the response to that letter in addition to the date of the briefing.
Puis sur votre motion, jusqu'où êtes-vous prêt à aller? Je sais que ça fait 5 jours que vous répondez à la question, mais peut-être que votre réflexion a évolué depuis. Si la majorité des partis d'opposition disent effectivement on veut une enquête publique, on ne veut plus de M. Johnston, vous qui avez un peu les cordons de tout ça, jusqu'où est-ce que vous êtes prêt à aller? Êtes-vous maintenant prêt à tirer la plug sur votre entente?
Donc, la prochaine étape, on va continuer de mettre la pression parce que on veut avoir une enquête publique. Ça, c'est important. Donc, les prochaines étapes, c'est de continuer de montrer la pression. On a utilisé notre journée d'opposition. On va avoir un débat aujourd'hui. Et la prochaine étape va être une vote dans la Chambre. Donc, on va continuer de monter la pression sur le gouvernement pour dire que c'est la volonté de la Chambre de communs, c'est la volonté des Canadiens, c'est important et on doit avoir une enquête publique.
Mais est-ce que c'est sur la table? Je veux dire, la motion, elle est non contraignante. La seule façon pour vous de la rendre contraignante et de mettre toute la pression que vous pouvez mettre, c'est en utilisant la menace de vous retirer de l'entente. Est-ce que ça, vous le considérez même?
Donc, il y a deux questions dedans. Premièrement, il y a beaucoup de travail qu'on va continuer. On va forcer ce gouvernement de livrer les soins.
Vous retirez de l'entente. Est-ce que ça, c'est sur la table?
Donc, on a beaucoup de travail qu'on veut faire. On va assurer que les Canadiens ont un soin dentaire et nos aînés ont un soin dentaire. Ça, c'est primordial, ça, c'est important. On va livrer ça. Et puis, la question de qu'est-ce qu'on fait avec notre entente. Pour moi, comme j'ai dit, ce n'est pas un jeu politique. Au lieu de créer des conditions pour peut-être encourager une élection, je pense que ce n'est pas de raison, ce n'est pas raisonnable si la vraie inquiétude, c'est une menace sur notre système électoral. Pourquoi je vais menacer une élection? Je vais menacer d'encore mettre plus de pression pour une enquête publique parce que je veux renforcer notre démocratie. Peut-être pour M. Poilievre, c'est une excuse de trouver une raison pour faire déclencher une élection. Mais si la peur, c'est il y a des ingérences étrangères de notre système électoral, si quelqu'un veut vraiment renforcer notre démocratie, je pense que la façon, c'est de garantir qu'on mette en place des mesures pour renforcer notre démocratie, au lieu de créer des conditions pour une élection. Dans mon avis, ça c'est une approche de M. Poilievre, une approche qui est un jeu politique au lieu d'une approche sérieuse pour renforcer notre démocratie.
How serious is your threat then to ask David Johnston to step down as special rapporteur if you're not going to follow through with pulling the plug on the confidence and supply agreement?
What we're doing is we're forcing this government, with a vote, we're forcing Parliament to decide on whether or not Mr. Johnston should continue. I think that's a serious question. Given the clear appearance of bias, we are putting before Canadians that it is no longer useful to have Mr. Johnston in that position, given the clear appearance of bias. It's not going to restore confidence in the electoral system. So we're going to push for that. But I would question the approach of creating the conditions for an election or triggering an election as not serious about protecting our democracy. If we want to protect our democracy, I would think the approach should be, let's put in place new measures. What are the new steps to protect against foreign interference? What are the new steps that are going to be taken to ensure that nomination meetings aren't being influenced, that MPs aren't being influenced? I would like to see a series of steps being taken, and that to me would show some real seriousness about protecting our electoral system. If it's just about a game to trigger an election, then sure, Mr. Poilievre's approach is tear it all down, have an election. I actually don't think this is a game. I think this is serious. I want to make sure that there are steps in place, that there are recommendations being followed that actually reinforce our democracy. Because for me, I want to see people believe in voting. I want to see people confident in voting, and I want to restore Canadians' confidence in that. It's not about a game for me. I want to continue to fight for a public inquiry because it's the right thing to do to give Canadians the answers to questions. But I don't see how it's logical if the goal is to protect our democracy to then trigger an election when we're worried about foreign interference. That doesn't seem logical.
L'important, c'est de renforcer la confiance. En même temps, vous nous dites, nous, on a confiance, on pense pas que M. Johnston est aussi biaisé que certains le disent, mais à cause de cette perception qu'a le public, on y succombe puis on demande qu'il se tasse. Est-ce que, ce faisant, vous n'encouragez pas, vous aussi, le manque de confiance des citoyens envers le système?
Je pense que c'est une question importante. Et quand j'étais dans l'école des droits, on a appris ce concept d'apparence de partialité parce que l'apparence nuit à la confiance dans le processus. Donc, je n'attaque pas M. Johnson et je pense que les attaques de M. Poilievre fait en sorte que c'est une attaque contre les institutions. C'est quelqu'un qui était crédible, qui a été choisi par M. Harper. Donc, les attaques de M. Poilievre, c'est vraiment ça. C'était attaquer tout le système, attaquer le pays, attaquer n'importe quoi pour avoir de pouvoir. Ça, c'est une approche de M. Poilievre. Mon approche est différente parce que je n'attaque pas la crédibilité de M. Johnson, j'attaque l'apparence de partialité parce que c'est là. Et à ce moment, après la révélation du avocat principal que M. Johnson a embauché, c'est clair qu'il y a une apparence de partialité ça fait en sorte qu'on ne peut pas continuer dans ce processus.
En agissant sur cette apparence, n'alimentez-vous pas le manque de confiance du public?
Je pense que l'apparence est vraiment solide à ce moment. Dans le passé, je pense que les attaques de M. Poilievre étaient pas crédibles. Mais maintenant, l'apparence est vraiment forte. L'apparence de le chef avocat, l'avocat principal qui a travaillé avec M. Johnson main à la main dans toutes les rencontres, dans tous les processus, qui a aidé avec l'analyse de tous les documents. Le fait qu'elle un bon avocat peut-être, mais elle a donné dans chaque élection des données au Parti libéral. Dans chaque élection montre clairement une partialité envers le gouvernement et ça nuit aux efforts de restaurer la confiance dans le système.
You admitted you haven't read the annex yet, so you can't really judge his work for yourself yet. So how can you then be so sure that he must step aside?
Well, our concern is about the appearance of bias. And the appearance of bias is very important in our system when it comes to judges, when it comes to independent decision makers. It's really clear right now, when looking at the work of Mr. Johnson, that the chief or the principal lawyer, the lawyer that worked with Mr. Johnson in analyzing the documents and reviewing the evidence, in meeting with people, this was the lawyer that met with me as well. It is very clear that her donation record since the early 2000s to present has been to donate to the Liberal Party in every electoral or election year. That is a clear appearance of bias that undermines the efforts of Mr. Johnson. And again, I don't believe it was appropriate for Mr. Poilievre to be so personal and attack Mr. Johnson, someone who's shown to be a credible person. But the appearance of bias is so strong at this point that it really does undermine the efforts of restoring Canadians' confidence. The appearance is what I'm talking about, and the appearance is very important. It's the appearance of these impartiality or partiality, bias or not bias, that really impacts people's confidence in the decisions that are being taken. And with such a bias that's very obvious now, or the appearance of such a bias, it makes it no longer tenable for Mr. Johnson to continue.
Sur une enquête publique, c'est la même chose. Sur une enquête publique, vous en voulez une et vous voulez aller jusqu'au bout. Vous avez utilisé tous les moyens possibles pour en avoir une. sauf, corrigez-moi si je me trompe, déclencher une élection. Vous n'allez pas déposer une motion de non-confiance envers le gouvernement. Vous n'avez pas l'intention de faire ça?
Donc, non, je ne pense pas. Si on est sérieux de protéger notre système de démocratie, je ne comprends pas comment une élection, dans un contexte où il y a des allégations d'ingérence étrangère, peut restaurer la confiance de notre système électoral. Je pense que c'est une...
À ce moment-là, il est où votre levier? Vous n'avez pas de levier?
Comment?
Il est où votre levier? Where's your lever? Comment vous allez faire pression sur le gouvernement si votre seule chose que vous pouvez utiliser, une élection, vous n'êtes pas prêt à aller jusque-là?
Donc, je donne l'exemple des soins dentaires. Dans le cas des soins dentaires, le gouvernement a dit non. Les libéraux ont voté contre. Il y a 2 ans, les libéraux ont travaillé ensemble avec les conservateurs pour voter contre cette idée. On a eu une entente. Tout le monde a dit, même vous avez une entente, vous n'allez pas réussir à livrer un soin dentaire, et on a réussi. Donc, le fait qu'on ait utilisé notre position de mettre la pression, de continuer, de ne lâcher pas, et on a réussi à avoir des soins dentaires. De la même façon, on va continuer de mettre la pression, on va continuer de pousser, parce qu'on pense que c'est important de prendre ces allégations sérieuses. On va continuer de mettre la pression.
Juste cette logique, vous dites, c'est pas logique. Alors que la confiance dans le système démocratique est ébranlée, c'est pas logique d'aller en élection. C'est votre raison pour laquelle vous voulez pas tirer la plug. Mais vous ne déclencheriez pas une élection. Vous faites juste dire au gouvernement qu'il doit gouverner comme un gouvernement minoritaire et prendre acte de ce que disent les partis d'opposition. Donc, votre logique à vous ne fonctionne pas. Vous ne déclenchez pas d'élection. Vous faites juste dire gouverner comme des minoritaires puis écoutez-nous. Pourquoi vous n'êtes pas prêt à faire ça?
Donc, 2 choses. Premièrement, on a des soins dentaires qui sont essentiels. Ça va aider des millions de personnes. On va forcer ce gouvernement de mettre en place cette mesure. Je ne veux pas donner les libéraux une excuse pour ne pas faire quelque chose qu'ils ont voté contre dans le passé. Ils ne veulent pas mettre en place des soins dentaires. Ils sont contre cette idée. Ils ont voté contre cette idée. Je pense qu'ils préféraient que je ne les force pas de mettre en place un soin dentaire parce qu'ils étaient contre ça. Donc non, je ne vais pas donner une excuse au gouvernement libéral de ne pas mettre en œuvre un soin dentaire parce que ça, c'est quelque chose qui va aider des millions de Canadiens. En plus, ça crée des conditions. Si on va dans cette direction, ça crée des conditions pour menacer une élection et ce n'est pas absolument ce que je veux faire. Je veux une enquête publique. Je veux restaurer la confiance dans notre système électoral. Ça, c'est mon but. Donc, je vais continuer de mettre ma pression pour réaliser mon but. Une enquête publique. Forcer ce gouvernement de faire ce qu'il faut pour aider les gens. Ça, c'est mon but. Et mes actions suivent mon but.
Monsieur Singh, vous avez beaucoup parlé des soins dentaires. Vous avez fait référence à plusieurs égards, à plusieurs moments. Dans le programme libéral, ça se fait par étapes. Et le dernier moment où tout ça sera complété, c'est en 2025. Êtes-vous en train de nous dire que quoi qu'il arrive, dans le fond, vous allez maintenir ce gouvernement au pouvoir jusqu'en 2025?
Non, parce que premièrement, on va à chaque année, il y a des autres mesures que le gouvernement doit faire, qu'on va les forcer de faire. Et ce sont les mesures dans notre entente. Donc, au-delà des soins dentaires, on a des assurances médicaments universelles. On a besoin d'avoir un projet de loi pour commencer ce travail important. Donc, ça, c'est quelque chose qu'on doit avoir. On a une entente avec 27, à peu près 27 éléments nécessaires. Et chaque année, on a des éléments que le gouvernement doit faire. Et sinon, on a l'option de toujours revisiter notre appui. Donc, on a plusieurs éléments.
Je comprends ce que vous me dites, mais c'est 2025 que le programme. Alors, si vous dites, aujourd'hui, je ne veux pas déclencher l'élection parce que j'ai besoin des dents, bien, l'argument va encore tenir en 2024. Il va encore tenir au début 2025.
Oui, pour moi, le but, c'est de forcer ce gouvernement de fonctionner. Donc, j'espère qu'on peut faire toutes les choses qu'on a forcé ce gouvernement de faire. Je sais que le gouvernement veut briser ses promesses. Je sais que le gouvernement ne veut pas faire ces choses et on doit les forcer. Donc, si on peut continuer de forcer ce gouvernement de livrer la marchandise, d'aider les gens, les soins dentaires, l'assurance médicaments, plus de protection pour les travailleurs, plus de protection pour notre environnement, je suis content parce que ça, c'est mon travail. Mon travail, c'est de forcer ce gouvernement d'aider les gens. Parce que ce gouvernement, laissé seul, ne veut pas faire ça. Ce Premier ministre, les libéraux, ne veulent pas faire tout ça. Mais je veux utiliser mon pouvoir pour aider les gens. Je veux avoir des soins dentaires pour les gens, pour nos aînés. Contrairement à M. Poilievre qui veut voter contre les soins dentaires pour nos aînés. Je veux avoir des soins dentaires pour nos aînés à travers les pays. Je veux avoir des soins, une assurance médicaments universelle. Je veux avoir plus de protection pour nos travailleurs. Je veux protéger notre environnement. Je veux faire tout ça. Donc, oui, je veux qu'on continue de faire le travail nécessaire, de forcer ce gouvernement de livrer les aides aux gens. S'il ne le fait pas, on a des options.
Do you worry about your own credibility? You keep kind of threatening to act, but you're not really acting. At what point do you become like the boy who cried wolf?
We are forcing this government to deliver. There's not a threat here. There's a straight up agreement where we have forced this government to do a number of things. Dental care, and we want to make sure dental care is delivered by the end of this year. I've spoken with seniors that are living in pain because they can't afford to get their teeth fixed. In every province of this country, there are stories of seniors who cannot look after their teeth and are living in pain in their senior years where they should be living with dignity and respect. Those seniors are going to be able to get their teeth looked after. If we look at what we're putting in place, it's going to help millions of Canadians, and I want to see that happen. That's what we're doing. We're forcing this government to deliver for Canadians. Where in fact, the government's supporting our demands. That's what's happening here. We demanded that there's dental care. The government's supporting us. We forced them to put in place a legal framework for pharmacare. We're forcing them to support us. So that's what we're doing. And along the way, we're also criticizing when they're not doing what's necessary, and we're calling them to account when they're not doing what they should be doing. And we're using our power to do that. We're saying, Mr. Trudeau, you're wrong not to declare a public inquiry. You can't just sweep this under the rug. Mr. Johnston's work is no longer able to restore confidence because there's a clear appearance of bias. So we're critical of the government, and we're delivering for Canadians. That's what we're doing.
Just on the Alberta election results, should you have intervened more, or do you think your supply and confidence agreement with the Prime Minister was a bit of a poison pill for Albertans and the NDP brand?
Well, I think what happened in Alberta, of course I'm disappointed that we didn't form a new Democrat government. I think that's bad for Alberta, it's bad for Canada. Albertans would have been better off with a new Democrat government, with a Premier Notley, they would have been better off. But let's look at what happened here. This is a province where just a decade ago, there was a single party system in Alberta. There was a Conservative Party, and that's it. That was the landscape of politics. Then there's three parties, and in that three-party split, New Democrats were able to win, and then change the landscape of politics in Alberta in a phenomenal way. New Democrats won more seats. The Conservatives lost seats. They won seats in Calgary. People that have voted Conservative their entire lives, and their families have voted Conservative their entire lives, voted New Democrat. What Ms. Notley did, former Premier, but Ms. Notley, what she did and what the New Democratic Party did in Alberta is change the landscape of politics and created a two-party system. Not too long ago, the entire number of opposition MPs was barely 10. And now, the opposition in Alberta has firmly, for 2 elections in a row, a significant New Democrat presence. And if you look at the results, thousands of votes separated New Democrats from actually forming government, just in the thousands of votes. That shows the force of New Democrats, and it shows a seismic landscape shift in politics in Alberta. And I want to acknowledge the hard work of all the New Democrats and Premier Notley, or former Premier Notley, and hopefully future Premier Notley, in achieving that.
Est-ce qu'elle a réussi, Mme Notley, tout ce que vous venez de dire, grâce à vous ou en dépit de vous?
Je pense que c'est grâce aux efforts de Parti néo-démocrate en Alberta et de Mme Notley. Ce qu'elle a fait, elle a montré, effectivement, elle a changé toute la situation en Alberta. Il y a 10 ans, personne ne va jamais préviser qu'on va avoir une telle force, une opposition comme Mme Notley et les néo-démocrates en Alberta a réussi à montrer. Donc, elle a vraiment changé tout le discours politique en Alberta Et ils ont encore montré qu'il y a une force qui continue des néo-démocrates. Ce n'est pas par hasard, une fois. Maintenant, le mouvement est fort. Ils ont gagné plus de sièges. Les conservateurs ont perdu les sièges. Donc, il a montré une force. Je suis déçu que Mme Notley n'a pas gagné, mais je suis confiant que le mouvement est fort en Alberta.
Une question en ligne de Anne-Caroline Desplantes. Allez-y.
Okay, you've been listening to Depictions Media Radio, and this has been Policy and Rights. If we want to see real change in our world, we have to speak up for it. We have to go vote for it. We have to make sure that our opinion is heard and that we do all the things that ensure that we get the world that we want. We can't just lay back and wait for it to happen to us. We have to be proactive, and we have to go and get what we want. So, we want to thank you again for listening today. Please find that subscribe button wherever it may be, and get continued updates from us on policy and rights. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.